about GPay and the future of secure digital payments in India. It's going to be an important piece, like I said, going ahead from here. And to discuss how important it is going to be, Sharath Bulusu is here. He's the lead product management for Google Pay. And for this discussion, Sumita Kareed, Deputy Editor of ET Now, my friend and colleague, joining us on stage for it. May I please welcome you back on stage, Sumita, along with your guest, Sharath Bulusu. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Vikram. Welcome to GBS, Sharath. Great having you here. Now, when we speak about scaling, especially as far as the payments ecosystem is concerned, we have to talk about the fact that Google has been an important part of India's digital revolution because you have several products baked into your ecosystem. But today we'll talk about payments specifically. You have about 37% of market share so far as the payments ecosystem is concerned. When you started, there were very few players, but now there's a whole host of startups as well, specialist payments players that are currently in the ecosystem. Give us a sense of the journey that you've had from that point to now, and how have you built products with trust and at scale?
You know, recently, whenever anyone said this to me, I've said this is probably one of the most fun phases of fintech we're entering. Just the breadth and scale of interesting players that we're beginning to see enter payments, where it started with, I remember 2016 is when I remember coming back to India. I was told one weekend that there is this seminar happening on something called UPI. I should go attend it. I was very skeptical. I didn't realize then that I would actually be working on UPI and probably consider it to be one of the proudest parts of my career, right? The way it is scaled is very interesting because it is not just a technical solution or a legal solution. It's been a very interesting mix of there is a spec that was created, there is legislation that enables it, there are institutions that have powered it, and it's enabled all of this to work with traditional existing players in payments like banks to work alongside new technology that players like us as well as many other startups could bring to the table. And the reason why it's worked is building trust is not just a matter of saying, hey, Google's a well-known brand, people can trust it. It's also all the bits that you build into the product. So last year, for example, we counted all the times that we told the user that, hey, we think this transaction looks unusual. Do you want to continue or not? And if the user said no, we counted that amount. It came up to 13,000 crores, $1.3 odd billion. Now, it sounds scary, it sounds large, but for a country of our size and for the scale of UPI, also remember that UPI probably processes just shy of $4 trillion a year, right? So it's a small number, but for the user to whom it happens, it's a big one. So I think features like these that enable users to maintain trust in payments is what's allowed us to grow.
Right, and when we talk about UPI, we have close to 400 million players in the ecosystem. We are a country of, internet users close to over 900 million. Where will the next phase of growth for payments come from, really?
And the next phases of growth are going to come from a few different areas. Some of them are structurally going to change. Having experience working in both commerce and payments in India, less than a quarter of the participants in digital economy, whether it's commerce or payments, are women, when they're 50% of the population. So I think as women's participation in not just the labor force, but in banking, in making some of these decisions increases, I think we'll see a new wave of users come in. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen there across rural and urban India. By the way, this number is only marginally better for urban India. The second thing that will happen, and I think of this when I think of my own kids, is I recently got my kid set up with UPI Circle, right? UPI Circle enables her to use me as a form of payment. I can delegate payments to her. She's 13 years old. If I'm going around thinking that digital payments are such an integral part of my life, just imagine what happens when this kid grows up and when her, like even younger kids grow up. They're going to need to learn how this works right from a young age. So I think the second thing that will happen is...
But isn't that going to be slightly tricky given the kind of regulatory pressures that there might be?
I think the beauty of what we're doing in India is that we're doing it as part of the protocol itself. See, in theory, my kid could have signed up for GPay by misdeclaring her age, right? I could have moved one bank account to her phone number and told her, sign up for UPI, do this. Technically, it breaks all sorts of terms and conditions that I've agreed to with banks. But what UPI Circle does is it gives her a legal, clean way to say, here is my parent delegating payment authority to me. Now, I've set it up for her where every single one of her payments is approved by me. And my agreement with her is, 6 months later, if I see that you're doing this well, I will change it to a rule-based thing. A transaction up to a certain size, up to a total per month, in certain places, you can spend that money. So I think they're structurally building it into the protocol itself. And I think that's the beauty of what's happening here. This is not people trying to say, let's somehow hand over my debit card to someone or my credit card to someone. This is the system itself enables that kind of claim.
And that's all the more important, building trust and safety into the ecosystem because you have so many vulnerable groups as well. And this is something that the Government of India is also working on so far as the digital personal data protection rules are concerned. Those rules have been out for consultation. And of course, the feedback is awaited. The deadline is extended. So safety is key so far as any digital products within your ecosystem is concerned. I want to understand a bit more on these recent trends of digital arrests, for example. Of course, you're doing a lot to keep your users safe, but how do you really mitigate some of these concerns? Because bad actors are always going to be a step ahead of regulators and policymakers.
Yes, I think there are broadly three things that you do in this space, right? The first one is there's no simple way of getting around the fact that we've got to educate users. I remember talking to people who've been working in banking for a while, saying that, look, when cards were first introduced in India, we had to tell people not to write their PIN on a piece of paper and keep it next to them, right? When computer systems came out, we had to tell people not to tape their passwords to their monitors and so on. So I think if you look at it like that, with every change that happens, people need to be educated about how to stay safe. Maybe it comes more naturally to people who've been in technology for a while, but there's no getting around customer education. The second thing that we do is utilize all the technology we have at our disposal. I mean, speaking as a part of Google Pay, I can say that we see threats and frauds emerge from multiple countries every day. The fact that we are really good at machine learning, AI, means that we can learn from these and prevent them from happening, prevent them from spreading. Right? The third thing that I believe that needs to happen is better enforcement. And increasingly, that is beginning to happen.
So when you say better enforcement, are you expecting more from policymakers on this front?
I think it has to be a partnership. Let's think of the stat, right? I think this is a stat from about 2021. There's a book called Future of Money which talks about this. In 2021, there were about a few tens of thousands, if I'm not mistaken, less than 50,000 bank-specific frauds that were done online that were reported in the US. In comparison, larceny theft, physical theft, was in the order of millions. Online fraud has gone up, but the difference is you can actually track it. Property theft, on the other hand, a lot harder to track, a lot harder to stop. So the way I see it is firms like ours that work in technology make it possible for enforcement to have the right information in a timely way, in the right place. So for example, various players in the fintech ecosystem in India work with I4C, the Ministry of Home Affairs, MeitY, to try and figure out how this information sharing helps curb fraud. Stats in India are if an online fraud happens, in less than 30 minutes, the money dissipates through the system. So the second side of it is you've got banks who will partner and say, how do we stop mule accounts from showing up? How do we do better with KYC?
Right.
So everyone's got a partner in making this happen.
So all ecosystem players have to come together so far as mitigating these threats are concerned, and of course, more importantly, digital brands like yourselves. But Sharath, is AI more of an enabler, or is it creating more risks and more threats? Because you have callers sitting, like you said, in several other countries in Southeast Asia and actually, carrying out these fraud transactions.
It's both. I think every new technology has done that. You can take an engine and use it to create an automobile that moves people. You can also use it to create weaponry. And it's true of AI as well. You're going to have bad actors who are going to use AI to try and mimic what you could consider to be an authority figure or someone else that someone will easily trust to commit social engineering. But at the same time, you've also got players like us and others who can deploy AI to detect and prevent that threat, right? So we've been talking about a hypothetical scenario. This is not live or released yet, but imagine that your phone can, on your device, in a privacy-safe way, listen to a conversation and alert you to someone trying to socially engineer you, right? And stop that fraud from happening. Many times that's all you need. You need someone to snap you out of that little bit of falling into a rut and thinking, yeah, I'm just going to enter my PIN, right? So there's a lot that we can do with AI that also works from the other side.
And we'll have to see whether AI really leads to more inclusion, because inclusion has been key to India's digital public infrastructure. And of course now, the AI model that India is now working on, and it has started inviting participants to sort of develop that. How are you looking at that? And secondly, on the point of inclusion, how are you making sure that this is core to all your products?
I think, see, for inclusion, this is probably like a golden age, right? Whether it is making your product available in more languages, adapting or personalizing your product to work for people with all sorts of ability, right? And this is not just ability with respect to digital literacy or something. It could be physical disability, visual, etc. The fact that voice systems have become more live, they've become low latency, and you can just have a conversation like we are having right now with a phone, whereas 2 years ago, your phone would wait, synthesize, think, and then respond. I think this is almost like a golden age to be able to solve for inclusion using AI.
So when you say it's a golden age to solve for inclusion, what are the new products and services within the digital payments ecosystem that you're planning to get into?
So some which we've been talking about publicly that NPCI also has been talking about is bringing voice to payments. So you enable people with different abilities to be able to use it. The second one is being able to work across a host of different languages. See, you said there are less than 400 million people on UPI. If we have to get to like 800 million for a country of our scale, they're all going to come from many, many different languages. We have, I think, more than 100,000 languages that if you set the bar at, hey, there are at least 1 lakh people speaking this, you'll find more than 100,000 dialects in this country. How are we going to set up translations for all of them? It's going to come from machine-based translation, right? So I think there's a lot you'll start seeing in this space. Google's been working with projects like Bhashini to make that happen on language. In systems like Android and Chrome, we build a lot of stuff for accessibility and disability. You'll see us doing a lot more in terms of enabling people through mechanisms like delegation. And that earlier point you made about trust and safety, I think that will go a very long way to just make people feel confident about stuff.
Now, the second point that I mentioned in the question that I asked you was about AI, and this is the final question, was about AI. The government of India is building its own AI model. What kind of synergies do you see Google making on that front? We know that Google is, of course, a big part of India's smartphone manufacturing, electronics manufacturing story, DPI as well, but what about AI?
Yeah, even in AI, I think, like I said, we work with projects like Bhashini, which is about enabling more and more Indian languages to be able to be used in different contexts, right? Ranging from software contexts to others. The second thing is, as a company, we are deeply invested in India for talent, as a market, as a place where new innovation comes from. I think this is the market where we're learning how to work with DPI. The first major product at Google that is built on top of DPI is GPay in India. And in that sense, I think there's a lot that we are learning here that we'll be able to apply.
Yes, indeed, exciting times ahead, Sharath. On that note, thank you very much for joining us on stage at the Global Business Summit. Thank you.